Welcome to the RotoWire Fantasy Football Podcast, sponsored by Pool Genius and Edge Boost. I'm Jim Coventry, joined by Anthony Cervino. Today's RotoWire show will include NFL free agency, which is starting next week. We're going to take a look at the top free agents as well as possible landing spots. Some players we'll discuss are Sam Darnold, Nick Chubb, Aaron Jones, Chris Godwin, T. Higgins, and Amari Cooper. So here we go. As we said, free agency kicking off. Unofficial free agency begins Monday, March 10th, where that's a legal tampering period. They can sign players, but not technically. And then the Wednesday, the 12th at 3 Eastern, those deals will become finalized. And we'll have live shows during next week's legal tampering period, so you won't want to miss that. Anthony Cervino, we're going to get right into things going by position here. But any quick hit thought about free agency upcoming?
Yeah, looking forward to it. We had another increase of the salary cap. And I think that teams can use that money to maybe bury contracts. I think the trading market, as we've seen over the weekend, is going to be extremely active. I'm really looking forward to this offseason. I think it could be one of the more hectic ones in recent memory.
Yeah, it's always fun. Can't wait for it to start. And with that, we're going to go to the quarterback position. Sam Darnold. All right, couple points here. Darnold started all 17 games for the first time since 2021. He did throw for 35 touchdowns and 12 picks, but there were times he played 7 teams that could bring pressure. His touchdown interception ratio, 6 touchdowns, 7 interceptions. We saw at the end of the season when he got under pressure and teams realized it, sharks in the water, he was in trouble. Anthony, thoughts on Sam Darnold and where might he land up?
Yeah, Darnold had a surprising season, really up until the end when the games really mattered. But Darnold proved himself to be, a quality starting quarterback in the NFL. I think that he's going to be coveted by some teams. One of the teams that I really like him for, and we've heard some rumors about it, is possibly the Indianapolis Colts maybe bring him in to compete with Anthony Richardson. And the good thing about that, Richardson's still on his rookie deal. So in case he's not ready, they don't have to completely move off of Richardson. They could bring in Darnold for a year or two to kind of bridge the gap.
So in terms of landing spots, you mentioned the Colts, quick hits. I could see the Vikings bringing him back if they don't think J.J. McCarthy is ready for prime time yet. I could see him possibly going back home to the Jets when improved their offensive line last year. The Rams, but they got this like Stafford's coming back. So if Stafford's officially back, that one's out. But if something falls through, and then finally the Browns. I could see the Browns making a desperate move as well. Anthony, next quarterback, one Aaron Rodgers, formerly of the New York Jets. What a disastrous 2 years for Rodgers. Couple points here. Now, a couple of spike years for Rodgers in 2020 and 2021, but he's thrown only 25 to 28 touchdowns in 4 of his last 6 seasons. And I'm not even counting about the Achilles tear season. So he hasn't been a dominant fantasy option really since 2016. His average yards per attempt has gone down. Last year, 6.7. That was like 2022 as well. So that number's been trending down. Anthony, what are your thoughts on Rodgers and where might he end up?
You know, Rodgers coming up the Achilles, we know how that worked for Kirk Cousins, but Rodgers towards the end of last year looked like a different player. Maybe it took him a little bit longer to heal, but Aaron Rodgers looks like he can still play football. Obviously, the Jets aren't going to bring him back, but what about the New York Giants? The Giants, they pursued Matthew Stafford. The rumors this offseason are saying, hey, we want to bring in a quarterback that's going to help us win now. We know that's not really realistic, but out of everybody out there, Aaron Rodgers seems like the most logical choice for the New York Giants to pair with Brian Daboll and Malik Neighbors. They have some dudes at wide receiver and at pass catcher and at running back. If the Giants can bring in Rodgers and bolster their offensive line, I don't think that's a bad fit.
Anthony, my mind, he's got to go to the Steelers because think about it. Heavy personnel. They're going to play 2 and 3 tight end sets. There's going to be play action. That means Rodgers will be protected. Play action's his friend. The receiver, if they can get Pickens kind of like somewhat right, he wasn't seen to be on the right page of the team, but Freiermuth, I think there's enough there. And I think this is a team in a Super Bowl window because they have a championship level defense. Rodgers could get them beyond that wild card mark they get every year. I like you're calling the Giants as well. Well, since we talked Steelers, the outgoing likely, he could end up back there, Russell Wilson. Now, Wilson, remember, last year, he looked great when he started with the Steelers. At least 264 yards in 4 of his first 6 games. But, man, tape came out on him, as has happened in the past. His last 5 games, he averaged, Anthony, 153 yards. His best game in his last 5 was 217 yards. Not much of a runner anymore either, down to 3.6 yards per carry. First time he was less than 4.3 in almost a decade. Thoughts on Russell Wilson?
Yeah, I was in on Russ last year, and towards the end, he's not the same player. Could he still manage a good enough team to the postseason? Sure. So I guess when it comes to Russell Wilson, I would stay put with the Pittsburgh Steelers if they want to bring him back. But if I'm going to sit back, maybe not rush into things, a potential landing spot, and Russ probably wants to start, but if I'm Russ, I would maybe try to go sign as a backup, maybe with Miami.
Oh, that could work out well for him. My landing spots, look, Tennessee. I think they're done with Will Levis in some ways. And, they invested in the coach. It wasn't so hot. Now, Wilson's not a great quarterback, but it would be better than what they had. The Browns. Again, Deshaun Watson, he's done. Wilson could probably be cheap. Stefanski will use play action. The line, we'll see if they get healthier, but could end up there. Anthony, next quarterback, Justin Fields, who spent last year with the Steelers. Now, last year, he had 6 starts. In 4 of those, he didn't make 146 yards passing. And the thing was, they used him as a game manager. They didn't want him to read defenses. They didn't want to put the ball in his hands too much. And he only ran for 4.76 yards per carry. I'd say only because earlier in his career, Fields had some crazy numbers. Did you know that Justin Fields has fumbled 44 times in 50 games? It's almost 1 per contest. What are your thoughts on Fields?
Yeah, I like Fields. He's a fun player to watch, but just because you're a fun player to watch doesn't mean you translate as an NFL quarterback. I saw rumors over the weekend Pittsburgh might bring him back. I don't know if that's the best idea because they pulled the plug on him early last season. Justin Fields probably fits the best as a backup somewhere. I mentioned the Indianapolis Colts earlier, similar skill set to Anthony Richardson, but what about the Raiders? We know the Raiders are hot and heavy in the quarterback market. It would give Justin Fields a place to start. But with now Tom Brady controlling things, does Tom Brady want to bring in a project, or does Brady want to go bring in a quarterback that's going to kind of weather the storm right now?
I love that Raiders take. And in old classic Raiders fashion, he was like that perfect Raiders quarterback. A lot of people out there are not old enough to know this. There's a dude named Vince Evans. He was like a career backup, played with the Bears some, and the Raiders brought him in. They had some fun throwing deep with him, see what would happen there. Again, I'm going to keep throwing the Browns out there for teams like this. The Browns need somebody. And again, we said Stefanski is willing to use play action. He is willing to use heavier personnel if he needs to. And the receivers, again, Jerry Jeudy, I thought a lot of Cedric Tillman. That may not be a bad thing. Hey, have you ever had your debit card declined or had to call your bank at 3 a.m. in Vegas? Edge Boost is the first consumer-facing online bank dedicated to the gaming industry. There are numerous benefits to using the Edge Boost. $250,000 per day in debit deposits, unlimited withdrawals, cash back on sports betting, DFS sweeps. Deposit $25, get $25, 100% approval for all gaming activity, financial segmentation for discretion and responsible gaming, compatible today for prediction markets, iCasino, DFS, sports betting, lottery, brick and mortar casinos, horse racing and sweeps, no transaction reviews or account freezes. You visit edgeboost.bet today and use the promo code ROTOPOD, ROTOPOD. Anthony, we move to the running back position. I will make no apologies. I am one of the biggest Nick Chubb fans on the planet. Here's what I'll say about this. Look, he had a devastating injury 2 years ago. It was like week 3 or week 2. I think it was like week 2 of 2023. Last year, they came back. We knew he wasn't going to be himself, but he's going to be 29. And he has 1,340 career carries. That's over 7 seasons, less than 200 per season. So I don't think he has a lot of tread that's been taken off his tires compared to other older backs. Before the injury season, Anthony, Chubb never had fewer than 5 yards per carry in a season. I think there's an excellent chance he is fully recovered this year. He had a college injury, recovered well from that. Anyway, durability is still a concern. He only played more than 12 games once since 2020, and that was in 2022. Thoughts on Nick Chubb?
Yeah, I think Nick Chubb still has something to give, but because of the injury history, the durability concerns, he's going to come cheap. I think a good landing spot for Nick Chubb, and we hear this all the time when a coordinator becomes a head coach, do they want to replicate what they did? What about the Chicago Bears? Chicago Bears needs a banger David Montgomery-like running back. They don't have that on the roster right now. And I mean, Roschon Johnson's nice, but Nick Chubb, if they can bring him in on the cheap to serve in that Montgomery role, I think that could be an outstanding fit.
Anthony, I've got 3. I think Chubb the Bears could be a playoff contender, so I like that. The Chargers, J.K. Dobbins is a free agent. Gus Edwards is old last year. Greg Roman's running scheme, Nick Chubb. The Steelers, to his arch rival. But the Steelers with Arthur Smith, they want to run the ball, and Najee Harris, a free agent. If they can get Chubb cheaply, that would be a massive upgrade. And then they could mix him in with Warren, keep him fresh. The other one, the Denver Broncos. We know how much Sean Payton wants to run the ball, and they couldn't run successfully last year. Nick Chubb could revolutionize that. All right, Anthony, we're going to move to our next running back, Aaron Jones. Last year, he played with the Minnesota Vikings. Now, Jones had 306 touches last year, 1,546 scrimmage yards. Now he'll be 30 this year, but a slight decline in efficiency could just still keep him in the fantasy radar, not high end. But because remember, other than 2023, when he missed 6 games with a hamstring injury, he's only missed 4 games in the other 5 seasons since 2019. So other than that one season, he's been very durable. Now, remember, last year he started hot. Anthony, he had at least 88 rushing yards 6 times in 11 games, but then down the stretch in the last 7, he only hit 73 once. He did look to slow down, and I am worried about that. Thoughts on Aaron Jones?
I like Aaron Jones, aging player, but last year with Minnesota, he had some injury concerns, but he still looks like a really good NFL back. Now, there are 2 landing spots for Aaron Jones that I love. One is just staying put with the Minnesota Vikings. We know he works there, but the other one, there's a running back needy team. Just talked about it a few minutes ago. The Raiders. The Raiders running back room is completely bare. They bring in Pete Carroll and Chip Kelly, 2 coaches that want to run the football, and Aaron Jones can do a little bit of everything, and he would also bring some veteran leadership to a fairly young locker room. I actually love the Raiders for Aaron Jones.
I had the Raiders down as well. The other one was a fun one. Look, Jones is not going to be expensive, I don't think. Yeah. The Kansas City Chiefs. Isaiah Pacheco, he's not going to be durable. I didn't draft him last year because he runs too hard I know his weight and height look fine. He's not a big back. And they need somebody because ultimately Kareem Hunt was playing. He was toast last year and he was still putting up yardage. They still need to run the ball there. That would be a fun one for me. But I love the Raiders call. To me, I think that's the optimal landing spot. But it'd be fun to see him with the Chiefs. All right, Najee Harris, Pittsburgh Steelers. The team says they might bring him back. We'll talk about that in a minute. Now, Harris has had his workload reduced last year in the last 5 games. But I want you to understand this. In 3 of those games where he saw the fewest touches, if you look at the box scores, you're like, oh man, he was phased out. He wasn't. Those 3 games, they were blown out. Jaylen Warren was more the hurry up back. So I want everybody to know that if you're looking at your game log hunting, he was in a timeshare co-number ones with Warren. As a receiver, 7.9 yards per catch. His previous high was 6.3. He was very effective as a receiver. In terms of a runner, look, every year of his career, he's between 3.9 and 4.1. He's that same guy. He's a durable, reliable back, but nothing special. Thoughts on Najee Harris?
No, I like Najee Harris more than most. I think he's underrated. And I think things just are getting a little bit stale in Pittsburgh. You said they might want to bring him back. They declined the 50-year option, but they can still, in fact, bring him back. Now, quite a few teams that are running back needy. We talked about the Raiders. Dallas, they can use a running back, but I don't know if Najee would be the right fit in Dallas. You mentioned the Chargers before. I think the Chargers would be my fit for Najee Harris if J.K. Dobbins leaves, because Dobbins and Harris, they have similar skill sets, but I think Harris is a superior pass catcher, and that explosiveness as a pass catcher in the backfield was a missing piece last year, because Dobbins could catch the ball in the backfield, but I think Najee brings a little bit more pop.
Absolutely. And like you said, the Steelers may bring him back. So his landing spots, I do put them at the top because it's easiest to stay with your team. The Giants, Tyrone Tracy was nice last year. He's not a lead back. They need some, even if it's a co-number one, that the Titans have already said that they've already known Tyjae Spears and Tony Pollard are the same back. They want to bring in a bigger back. That would be Najee Harris. So those are a couple other landing spots to look at. Anthony, J.K. Dobbins of the Los Angeles Chargers. Now, here's what was interesting last year. He was 4.6 yards per carry last year. Now, remember, before pre-injuries, he was like 5.7 yards per carry from 2020 to 2023. So this was way lower. Still, he had a 75th percentile broken tackle rate, 68th percentile yards after contact. So he was really good. But here's the important thing, Anthony. The first 2 games of last season, Dobbins had 255 yards and 2 touchdowns. The rest of the way, the last 11 games, 3.86 yards per carry. So it was those 2 massive games in 1 and 2. And then after that, he was good, but the offensive line didn't help him. So there's that. And don't remember, there's always the durability concerns. He has missed a ton of time in his career. Thoughts on J.K. Dobbins?
You know, Dobbins would be best fit in a supporting role or a co-backfield role, not so much the lead guy like he was with the Chargers. And again, said it earlier, quite a few running back needy teams. Now, if Nick Chubb leaves Cleveland, I think J.K. Dobbins in a backfield with Jerome Ford would be really nice.
That's a great call. I could see him there. Going back to the Chargers, possible. You mentioned the Raiders for other teams. That's a possible spot. The Bears, you mentioned, is a team that needs a running back. He'd be a good pairing with DeAndre Swift. That's a possibility as well. But I definitely think these are some great calls. Anthony, we are going to go over more of these free agents after we take a short break. All right, Javonte Williams of the Denver Broncos, or I should maybe formerly. We'll see if he ends up back there. Anyway, he regressed from his 2023 season in terms of production. Williams played all 17 games. He was technically the lead back, but that vacillated. He never really was the clear guy. Only 513 yards and 4 touchdowns on 139 carries. As a receiver, sure, he caught a lot of passes, so we were fine there. But realistically, he had gone from 744 yards in 2023, lost, like I said, down to 513 last year. It was not good. Yards per carry, 3.6 and 3.7. I will, in his defense, say this. When Williams was on the field, defenses seemed to load up to stop the run. When they brought other backs, they kind of backed off. But still, this is not a good version of Javonte Williams. Thoughts on Williams?
Yeah, at this point, Javonte Williams could very much be just a guy. But, you know, is there a team that might need a backup running back or supporting in between the tackles runner? I kind of like the Giants for Javonte Williams. Maybe the Carolina Panthers, because Chuba Hubbard, he's the guy. They paid him. Jonathan Brooks, I don't even think he plays this year. Miles Sanders is still there. I think that's one of the under-the-radar landing spots for a back is Carolina. And if Javonte Williams comes on the cheap, that could be the spot. Also, another sneaky one is the New Orleans Saints. You know, we don't know what Kendre Miller is. You know, Alvin Kamara, you know, they re-signed him, but he's on the back nine of his career. I think one of those 2 teams in the NFC South could work for Javonte.
I could see the Patriots reaching out for him. They tried Antonio Gibson last year. Maybe Javonte Williams. I know he's a bigger back. He's a good receiver. Yeah. Maybe pairing him with Ramondre Stevenson might not be bad. And then if Stevenson gets banged up, Williams could mix in. I think that could be a fun landing spot as well. Let's go to Rico Dowdle of the Dallas Cowboys. Now, Rico Dowdle last year, the numbers were great, Anthony. But remember this. Through week 11, he only had 1 game with more than 12 carries. the last 7 games, he was averaging 20 carries per game, and he played well. Remember, the Dallas offensive line was getting worse as the season went on, and yet he was still at least 73 yards in 6 of his last 7 games, all 4 of his 100-yard games, Anthony, between weeks 13 and 17. So he was really peaking at the right time. Now, those games were mostly against bottom half defenses, should understand that as well. Now, the offensive line, like I said, he overcame that. I give him a lot of credit. I think, though, on the flip side, I don't think teams ever played Dallas and said, we have to stop Rico Dowdle. So there could be something to that. What are your thoughts on Dowdle?
I think Dowdle's best landing spot is probably just staying in Dallas. Now, he's going to come cheap. I'm sure he realized they are going to bring in a running back to be the guy. But Rico's skill set, I think he's a change of pace guy. So staying in Dallas is probably the best thing to do for Rico Dowdle. Again, I fully expect Dallas to upgrade that running back room, but a short deal for Rico to stay put is probably the best decision for all parties.
Yeah, because remember last year Dallas went all in on their team, and remember they drafted like 7 running backs for the draft. I'm kidding, they drafted 0, big fat 0. And this year the talk is they're going to draft Genty. We'll see. But again, if they don't go heavy in the draft after a running back, I agree with you. Dallas is a good landing spot. They have to be pleased with what they saw last year. Yeah. Again, the Giants need a kind of a compliment to go 1-2 punch with Tyrone Tracy. I think Dowdle could kind of function in that. The Raiders, if nobody wants to sign there may be a free landing spots possible as well. Interesting one here as we get to the bottom of the barrel. Cam Akers last year, he played with both the Texans and the Vikings. He actually played in 17 games, which is good for a guy that's had 2 Achilles tears. And he ran for 444 yards, averaged 4.3 yards per carry. This does not look like a player coming off of 2 Achilles injuries. So I think that's great. He had a small sample size first. Understand that. 90th percentile broken tackle rate, but he was only he was very good. 74th percentile yards after contact. When I watched Cam Akers last year, he looked like a decent back. I'm not saying he's a world breaker. I'm not saying he's a superstar, but I'm saying he looked like a good functional back on limited work. Thoughts?
Yeah, Cam Akers, at this point of his career, he's a journeyman running back. I think he's going to fill a roster at some point. I think Akers is more of a second wave of free agency signing when it comes to, where could he potentially land? I think on the back end of somebody's depth chart, we mentioned teams like New England. I think New England would be a solid spot for Cam Akers.
I think the Dolphins need a little more powerful back to go with Devon Achane. Mostert's gone already. Last year, Jalen Wright, I don't think they were overly optimistic with this one. He's a speed guy anyway. Jeff Wilson has not done anything since his first 2 games there in the middle of the season than the first year that Coach McDaniel was taking over the team. I do think they need somebody else a little more. And again, he's not durable. I understand he hasn't been, but Akers is a little more of a physical presence. I think Miami could also, in addition, like you said, New England be a good landing spot. Could see him ending up in Dallas as well if Dallas has a hard time signing anybody, but he gets more of a depth guy. But again, if he plays like he played at the end of last season and he can stay healthy, I think Cam Akers could be a little bit of a surprise for fantasy. And as we talk about it later, you may want to just take it early, just take a late dart on him. He could end up being a little something. Anthony, want to win more in your golf, March Madness, and football pools? Pool Genius gives you data-driven picks and strategies to outsmart the competition. With over a decade of analytics and historical data, Pool Genius is the only site dedicated exclusively to helping people win sports pools. With Pool Genius, users winning 3 times more often than expected. RotoWire listeners get exclusive offers. Visit poolgenius.com/RotoWire. Again, poolgenius.com/RotoWire for up to 55% off or start a free 4-day trial. That's poolgenius.com/RotoWire. Anthony, we are going to move to the wide receiver position. Now, we're starting out with T. Higgins. The expectation as of now seems the Bengals want to retain him. We'll see how that all shakes out. But I want to point out a few things anyway. Higgins has never had 1,100 yards in a season. He's never had more than 110 targets in a season. 2024 was the first time he had more than 7 touchdowns, although he has at least 5 every season. He has talent. Injuries clearly have been an issue. He's missed 5 games in 2023, 5 games in 2024, other games in his career where he's left early. That said, if he doesn't go to the Bengals, he's going to command wide receiver 1 type money, I think, but he has not shown the ability to be that. Thought about Higgins.
Higgins is the cream of the crop at wide receiver this year. I like the Bengals the most. They keep the core together, stay with Joe Burrow, but we know the Brown family doesn't always like to shell out that money. So let's say T. Higgins did leave Cincinnati. The Patriots are that recurring name that keeps coming up. They have the most cap space. They have a young quarterback. They just changed coaches, brought in Vrabel. I think you want to get this franchise off to a good start. And T. Higgins to the Patriots, and then also possibly even the Raiders. Those are my top 2. They have the money to spend, which means they can overpay. And, we know the Bengals, they need to re-sign a bunch of guys, including Chase and Burrow. So if the Bengals did come in with an offer, those 2 teams, if they want that potential alpha wide receiver 1, they can go break the bank and bring him in. So I would say Patriots and Raiders are my 2 top spots for T. Higgins.
Now, before I go over my landing spots, I want to point out, I used to be very diligent at the beginning of free agency. I'd go to overthecap.com. I'd see who has money, who doesn't have money. And Anthony, after all these years, I see these teams who don't have money spending it. And I'm like, you know what? The salary cap doesn't matter. And you're right about New England. They have a ton of money. And I'm not disputing that. What I'm saying is I can't rule out teams that don't have money, because that has not been true, because they can make it work. You can kick the can down the road. So I want to point that out to everybody. If you're overthecap.com is great, and I love it and I use it, but don't let it discount you from ruling players out because this team is 80 million over the cap. It gets done. So my landing spots for Higgins, like you said, Anthony, of course, the Bengals. It does seem likely he ends up back there. The Bills. And I know the Bills moved on from Stephon Diggs 2 years ago, but I think it was more of a personality clash. I think Higgins isn't that guy that's going to demand the football behind the scenes. I think that the Bills may have learned last year, this Super Bowl window, it could close, and they start competing with the Chiefs and the Ravens and maybe more teams. But with the receiving group they've got, they may not have a chance to get past those teams. So I think that's a spot. And, of course, the Chargers, they really want to get Justin Herbert, a physical number 1 to go with Ladd McConkey. That'd be a nice addition. Anthony, our next one. Chris Godwin, Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Now, as of February 23rd, the Athletics' Dan Pompei believes it appears certain the Bucs want to re-sign Godwin. But there was another report saying they won't franchise him. So they're going to probably look to sign him to a contract. For what that's worth, Godwin last year dislocated ankle week 7, okay? He was on pace for his 4th straight season with at least 83 catches, 1,023 yards. I know those aren't eye-popping numbers. Last year, he was a perfect fit in Liam Cohen's offense for the Rams at the time. Ram-style offense, I should say. That was the Tampa Bay. It was a Ram-style offense. And we call that the preseason, Anthony. We talked about how Godwin could be weaponized. Anyway, Godwin had 8 to 13 targets in 6 of 7 games. So he was a target monster. What I'm going to point out here is, and I know I'm going to ask you for your teams in a minute, Liam Cohen, who was the coach of the Buccaneers, is now coaching the Jacksonville Jaguars, and they want to get rid of Christian Kirk, who they overpaid a few years ago. So talk about Godwin, and I want you to answer whether you think the Jaguars are a good fit, and then give me your fits.
Yeah, Godwin getting up there a little bit in age, but we saw it especially early last year. He has plenty left in the tank. Now, that's exactly where I was going when you brought up Liam Cohen going to Jacksonville. They want to move off Christian Kirk. And I think Godwin to Jacksonville will be outstanding. I think Trevor Lawrence can play. What was standing in Trevor Lawrence's way, Doug Peterson, Press Taylor. Look at Liam Cohen. I get Canales gets a lot of the credit, but Liam Cohen really made Baker and that offense pop. And I think the Jaguars could be sneaky good from a fantasy football perspective. That's another conversation for another show. But Godwin and Jacksonville is my absolute favorite landing spot. We can't forget Dave Canales and Godwin. They were paired together, and there's a drastic need for wide receiver in Carolina.
Absolutely. The Jaguars are mine. I also see, like the Buccaneers being a fit. We didn't talk about the trade, and we're going to take a minute to do that in a second. Before Deebo Samuel moved to the Commanders for a 5th-round pick, I had Godwin going to the Commanders, possibly. Deebo Samuel ends up there, Anthony. And I have a video in the hopper right now. Our video editing team is putting it together about Deebo Samuel. Deebo Samuel in 2021 had 1,700 change yards, scrimmage yards. I believe it was like 17 touchdowns. Don't quote me. It was close to that. In the last 3 years, he's averaged 929 yards. He averaging 14 games played. So he plays quite a bit, but he's not been the same player. What are the Commanders getting here? 29 years old, last year of his contract. No more Kyle Shanahan scheming him open either.
Yeah, I like this move more for Washington, for a team trying to chase a Super Bowl than I do from fantasy football. I'm only touching Debo and fantasy at the right price. But when it comes to Washington, I get it. They could regress, but I think this is a team that maybe if they went after Debo at the trade deadline, maybe we're having a different conversation about how far they advance. But I think from an NFL perspective, Debo Samuel is going to help this Washington team make plays. Now, Cliff Kingsbury is not Shanahan, but they can still scheme Debo Samuel open. And some of those plays in games that they lost or where they struggled, there wasn't many, where they were kind of going underneath to Zach Ertz. That could potentially be Debo Samuel territory. And Debo Samuel, instead of falling down like Ertz for the first down, maybe he's breaking a big play. So NFL, love it. Fantasy at the right price.
Right now, I'm going to tentatively call Debo a wide receiver 3 for fantasy in 12-team leagues. I'm going to say there's both upside and there's downside. There's both. And it's going to be very pivotal. His physical style has not done him well. He's an old 29. But like you said, Anthony, this is a boon. You're obviously Jaden Daniels is a top 3 quarterback in most fantasy leagues, so you're not raising his stock. But this solidifies. I think this raises his floor. I think that's a real important. And I think it potentially helps Terry McLaurin too. Because teams, look, De'Ami Brown played great down the stretch. I get it. But McLaurin is going to be like public enemy number 1. With Debo on the field, defenses do have to give a much more of a thought to Debo. And maybe even with De'Ami Brown, they have a 3-receiver set now that could be competitive much more than it was last year. So I think, like you said, for the Commanders, this is a really, really smart move. All right, back to free agency, but I don't know how I left out Debo Samuel at the top of the show. Wow. Talk about how long a weekend could feel. All right, Amari Cooper with the Bills and the Browns last year. Now, Cooper played 8 games with the Browns. He was traded to the Bills, like I said. Never became a part of the offense. He had a wrist injury that cost him some time. Before that trade, Cooper had 3 games, at least 60 yards and a terrible offense, so he still could play. It wasn't like he was washed up. And if you remember, before last year, he had 1,000 yards in 4 or 5 seasons, and his best 2 seasons of his career for pretty close. He had one in Dallas that was there, but 2022 and 2023, 2 seasons combined, that was his best stretch of football for 2 years ever. He's going to be 31. He could firmly be in his decline phase. That's very possible. But again, he was excellent at 28 and 29 years old. Last year, we have no point of reference of what he was. Thoughts on Cooper?
I don't know who Amari Cooper is anymore. Last year was a complete disaster. Early was because of the quarterbacks in Cleveland, and then he goes to Buffalo, and he was not even part of that offense. Clean slate this year, and I think if there's a team out there that could potentially kick the tires where it can work, I like Green Bay. Green Bay needs a wide receiver. I get everybody, especially in fantasy, they love what they have. But there is no true wide receiver 1 in that wide receiver room. I think Amari Cooper and that veteran leadership, it's a very young wide receiver room. I think Amari Cooper would be great for that entire offense, including Jordan Love.
You know what? Yeah, I think hadn't even thought of that, but I think Amari Cooper would be a great call. It's like you said, and I said earlier, we really don't know who Amari Cooper is right now. Hopefully in fantasy drafts, he's deeply discounted and we could get him at a value if we're taking him, because there's a lot of risk because of the unknown, and the age is a thing. There are not a lot of 31-year-old running backs dominating at this point. So that's important to know. One other thing, like last year when he got traded, I always say this, often receivers don't fit right in when they get traded. If it's a superstar like a Terrell Owens, or a Randy Moss that comes to a team new, yeah, they're going to get the ball a gajillion times because they're superhumans. But even good receivers that switch teams, that often does not work. You don't know the offense. You don't know the chemistry. There's a lot of variables. So I don't know what to make of Cooper from last year. Next, we're going to Hollywood. Yes, we are. Hollywood Brown. Hollywood Brown, kind of with the Chiefs last year, spent most of the season with that sternoclavicular injury he suffered in August. I got that one right. And I missed most of the season. And so now Chiefs GM Brett Veach said Casey will look to get Brown back, and I think they could get it back cheaply because he didn't play last year. And in the playoffs, he didn't flash. But realistically, we expected in the preseason last year that between Brown and Xavier Worthy, they would have different ways to stretch the field, open it up, release up players underneath for Patrick Mahomes. Rashee Rice will come back. I really think they want that speed element. Thoughts on Marquise Brown after a lost season?
Yeah, you and I had a lot of hopes for Marquise Brown in Kansas City. We never really saw that come to fruition because of the injuries. Staying put in Kansas City, I think, is very much realistic. But, the recurring team that keeps coming up when we're talking free agents is the Chargers. I think if he leaves, I think he stays in the West and potentially goes to the Chargers to complement Ladd McConkey as down the field stretcher. I think that dynamic's kind of missing. Sure, they have Quentin Johnston, but he's not exactly the most reliable guy. Hollywood brings a little bit more stability to that room.
You know what, Anthony? It's interesting you mentioned stability, though. Brown has not surpassed 1,000 yards since 2021. Yeah. Durability he's a small dude. I get what you're saying. When he's on the field, you're right.
Yeah.
But he's still not somebody like he's not like a fundamental piece of the offense. He has to be like a part of it at this stage, I think.
Yeah.
But that said, Anthony, and I liked your other point, the Texans are a possibility. Who knows if Tank Dell's coming back next year? He has to have a second surgery. It was a very grisly injury. Stephon Diggs, it doesn't sound like he's coming back. And they have Nico Collins. Collins clears out a lot of space. Hollywood Brown can run over the middle of the field. He's a small dude, but he's very good at running space routes. And I think he could fit there as well. Let's go next. Keenan Allen, last year's Chicago Bears. Now, Keenan Allen has said he either wants to play with the Chargers, the Bears, or retire, but who knows what that means. And I actually think he said Los Angeles. Now, could that mean the Rams? Probably not, but possibly, right? But decline is showing on Keenan Allen. His yards per catch, 10.6, lowest is 2017. Now, you could say the Bears were throwing underneath, but remember, it wasn't like he was seeing a lot of downfield targets with Justin Herbert. He was a possession guy there. But 43rd percentile yards after the catch, that's where it really digs in because he was much better than that earlier in his career. Durability has always been a concern. Of the last 51 possible games, Keenan Allen's missed a quarter of those games, 13. And last year, think about this, Anthony. He's like a great hands guy. He only caught 57.9% of his passes. And for a short and intermediate receiver, unacceptable. Now, Caleb Williams, some of them were his fault, but for the most part, Allen just is not the same guy. Anyway, thoughts on Keenan Allen, where he might end up?
I don't know if Keenan Allen is destined for retirement just yet, but I could see Keenan Allen saying, at this point in my career, I'm going to go pull Derrick Henry. I'm going to go try to chase a Super Bowl somewhere. And two teams, one in each conference that comes to mind. Obviously, Buffalo, there's a need for wide receiver there, good quarterback, Super Bowl caliber team. And I'll throw this out there. And obviously, they can make the money work. What about the 49ers for Keenan Allen? There is a need for a wide receiver. Again, he wants to go chase a Super Bowl. I don't mind that. I think he's going to go, if he plays, it's going to be with a legitimate contender. And those are the two big ones that come to mind.
The Dolphins don't run a lot of 3 receiver sets. But if they want to get clever and creative, and Tua being the short passing game guy that he is, and knowing Hill gets nicked up. And you know what? Hill and Waddle don't play a ton of snaps either. You'll see him playing 70, 75% of snaps. So Keenan Allen, maybe even going to Miami could work. If they're going to keep rolling with Tua, that might work there as well. I know I've mentioned the Rams. Why I don't see that? Those Rams receivers have to block. And I don't see Keenan Allen at this stage of his career. He's injured enough as it is taking on the punishment those receivers take. So I don't see that one. It is possible he ends up back with the Bears. I think that'd be bad for the Bears because Romo Dunze needs to be unlocked. But I could see them going back, seeing that Allen wants to play there, and he could end up there. All right, Stephon Diggs of the Houston Texans is next. 47 catches, 496 yards. played 8 games. So that's close. That's actually with 17-game season. It was a 1,000-yard pace. He wasn't like tearing up, but he wasn't bad. He was productive with the Texans. Now, 45th percentile yards after the catch with age, that's going down. It's the way it's a post-30 player. It's going to be. Otherwise, he had the ACL injury. So we don't know about recovery from that. And age, that could complicate it. Thoughts on Stephon Diggs?
Yeah, Diggs is another aging wide receiver. Is probably going to land somewhere. It's just a matter of where that place is. I think a sneaky landing spot, and I think a few things need to happen here. But if Seattle moves off to DK Metcalf, I can kind of see Stephon Diggs landing in Seattle on a 1-year deal.
Like that as well. I don't think he ends up back with the Texans, but if it's a very friendly deal, they're going to need bodies at receiver. I could see the Raiders. I could see the Raiders making, and I know that I don't know what the locker room presence for Diggs is. Based on what I saw with Buffalo, I wonder if it's very good. But if he does have some leadership skills and they think it's there, could see him in the Raiders. The Saints. Could see him with the Saints, but it's not an exciting landing spot, but it's a place I could see him ending up. Chris Olave's had his share of concussion issues, and Rashid Shaheed's coming off a serious injury. See what happens there. Let's do one more wide receiver. Let's do Darius Slayton of the New York Giants. Now, Darius Slayton has been an interesting player. Doesn't get a lot of heralded talk, but he played with Daniel Jones and other bad quarterbacks throughout the year, and yet last year, still gets 573 yards, 2 touchdowns. But did you know this? During his 6 seasons, 4 times in those 6 seasons, Slayton's had at least 724 yards. That's not bad. 724 or more in 4 of 6 seasons on bad offenses. This guy can play football. He just has been in a bad spot. Thoughts on Slayton?
Slayton staying put in New York, it would probably be best. Because he knows the offense, he knows the system. If he did leave, maybe a team like the Denver Broncos. We haven't really talked about them. There are needs at wide receiver there, and I think Sean Payton and Bo Nix would be a solid landing spot for Darius Slayton and his skill set.
The Buffalo Bills had a lot of success with Mac Hollins last year, but ultimately he's Mac Hollins. And Amari Cooper, I'm pretty certain, is not coming back. I can't say that for a fact, but probably not. I could see Slayton going there. That'd be a positive because that really, he's better than Gabe Davis in my mind. And that could be what they need to go back to, that downfield guy. We mentioned earlier the Chargers. Chargers need more of a downfield guy to go underneath Ladd McConkey. And if the Chiefs don't bring back Hollywood Brown and they're not going to bring back DeAndre Hopkins, I could see him going to Kansas City on a cheap deal as well. You know what? I lied. Let's just quickly mention DeAndre Hopkins. Is Hopkins have anything left in the tank?
If anything, not much. If he does sign somewhere, it's going to be in a very short 1-year deal, probably incentivized. Is there a chance he goes back to Houston? Houston's a wide receiver needy team. Their entire wide receiver room seems injury prone. I think Hopkins could be that guy who could step in on a week-to-week basis if somebody misses a game.
And you're right. That's a good landing spot. And Zach, thanks for the nice comment. With DeAndre Hopkins, the fact the Chiefs phased him out, they needed help, and they phased him out. And you're intimating that you were a good sport by putting up an option for Houston for him. Dallas, maybe a big body outside, but again, like you're saying, and I'm saying, he's 33.
Yeah.
It's the end of the line. We saw it with Julio Jones. I get it. It's 33, but it's 33. Julio Jones couldn't make it that far. We don't see it happen often. I get it that Adam Thielen had his little resurgence. He had been toast for years and then ended up with that underneath role in Carolina. So all that said, RotoWire covers all the fantasy sports. Did you know you can get a free 2-day trial without a credit card? To check that out, all sports we've got, you go to rotowire.com/pod. Check us out. If you join the team, we love it. If not, we're happy you took a look. Anthony, let's finish off the show with tight ends. Juwan Johnson. Remember, Juwan Johnson was a converted wide receiver. And when he's had an opportunity to get the ball, he is a good seam stretching tight end. And last year, career year, 50 catches, 548 yards, 3 touchdowns, only 66 targets. So I keep saying, if this cat gets more targets, he really could be a major player. He has a pair of 500-yard seasons in the last 3 years. Targets only 59 to 66. What are your thoughts on Juwan Johnson?
Yeah, I think Juwan Johnson can certainly play. He's had a nose for the end zone through the years. two AFC teams that come to mind for Juwan Johnson. One's the Indianapolis Colts. It seems like year after year they are looking for that guy at the tight end position. It seems like we've been saying this for 5 years. The other one is with the New Orleans Saints. With the Denver Broncos, another team with a vacancy at tight end. I think Juwan with Sean Payton in that offense would be a nice fit as well.
So, Joe, I could see him. The Denver fit's beautiful. Sean Payton, like you said, loves his former players. The Commanders, talk about an upgrade from Zach Ertz. This guy can run. This guy can scoot down the field. All those things that were catch and fall, Juwan Johnson could turn those into 12-yard gains. That would be another decent landing spot. You loved Mike Gesicki, and rightfully so, last year. Gesicki last year, free agent with Cincinnati Bengals, 665 yards and 2 touchdowns, 65 catches. He was reliable, but up and down, right? The last great season he had before last year was way back with the Dolphins a number of years back, 2021. He had like 780 yards, but he had 6 games, Gesicki, with 0 to 2 targets. He had 5 games at 8 to 12. So he was feast or famine, and you never knew what to expect. What could you see for Gesicki?
Gesicki staying put with Cincinnati, I think that's the best possible landing spot for him. Hopefully Cincinnati keeps T. Higgins, but if T. Higgins leaves and Gesicki stays, remember those games where Higgins didn't play? Gesicki was an absolute monster.
100%. I think he goes back to Cincinnati, huh?
No.
He goes back to Cincinnati. Where else would he go at this point? I think that's a perfect spot for him. Let's do one more quickly. Tyler Conklin.
Maybe Chargers?
Why not add a 9th tight end to the roster?
Yeah.
Right? No, they could, because the guys they signed, like Hayden Hurst, obviously passed. They moved on from Darnell Parham finally. Just unfortunately the injury. He was a talented dude. Yeah. Just the injuries piled up over time. So, but yeah, that could work out as well. Tyler Conklin. Look, last year, 4-year lows in all receiving categories, aside from touchdowns. That was the most touchdowns of his career. But once they had Devontae Adams and Garrett Wilson, it wasn't like Tyler Conklin was going to shake things up. But remember, Conklin before 2024, he's like 580 to 620 yards a year, 60 catches, 85 targets. He was a very, very reliable guy. Anything on Conklin?
Yeah, if there's any landing spot for Conklin, and he's obviously going to go somewhere. Possibly, again, the usual teams in the offseason we named for tight ends. I think Indianapolis could work. Maybe even the San Francisco 49ers to add some depth behind George Kittle. I think that's a sneaky one.
Yeah, that would definitely be a great place. I go back to the Commanders again. Zach Ertz was great last year, and if they can't get somebody like Juwan Johnson, again, Tyler Conklin can move after the catch. He's not a burner, but he is definitely an upgrade, like on a mid-30s tight end. So if they need that, the Saints look like Taysom Hill is coming back from like a devastating injury. Looks like Juwan Johnson's gone. They're going to need a tight end. Tyler Conklin could fit there as well. Next Monday, the 10th of March. This show will take place at 5 Eastern because it's the first day of the NFL free agent legal tampering period. Anthony and I will go over the initial signings of that first day. You won't want to miss that show. Thanks to our sponsors, Pool Genius and Edge Boost. Thanks to everyone for listening. Remember, give Anthony a follow on socials at The Real NFL Guru. You could catch me over at Jim Coventry NFL. Thanks to everyone for being here. Again, come back next week. We're looking 5 Eastern, legal tampering period. Everybody, have a great rest of your day.